Welcome to Beyond the Ordinary, a space for extraordinary souls navigating a world that often feels anything but simple. The battles you face, the challenges that test you, these are not random. They are the refining fires that meant to shape you into something much greater. Here, we explore the grace, strength, and wisdom that emerge when you rise above what others call impossible. This is your journey to uncover the extraordinary within. Welcome back, and if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. What you're about to hear is built differently. I use the power of AI to produce this show, not to make things up, but to save time and give you daily access to something that would otherwise take months to create. Every episode is built around a specific framework of books, lectures, expert research, and analysis distilled into a conversation that you can actually observe. And if you've been skeptical about AI, I totally understand. Like anything in this world, technology can be used to harm or to heal, anti-life or pro-life. My intention with this show is to demonstrate what's possible when you use these tools for something genuinely good, for your growth and for the world. My goal is not perfection, it is access. Access to knowledge that can authentically expand how you think and how you live. Stay open-minded and let's go deep.
What if I told you that the reason you can't seem to leave a toxic relationship has absolutely nothing to do with love? Like, zero. And actually, it has everything to do with the exact same brain chemistry that keeps a gambler, chained to a slot machine at 3 a.m.
Yeah, it's a completely different mechanism than what we see in the movies.
Right, because we have this collective cultural myth, I think, that staying in a bad relationship is a sign of weakness or low self-esteem or just really poor decision-making. We just tell people, just leave.
Which is the least helpful advice you could possibly give.
Exactly. So today, we are tearing down that myth. Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are taking on a massive really transformative exploration into the actual mechanics of toxic relationships. We are dissecting why people get into them, why brilliant, highly capable people stay in them, and ultimately we're laying out a rigorous roadmap for you to become whole again.
Because the mission here is radical. We aren't talking about surviving a rough patch. We are talking about waking up, dismantling your own subconscious protective mechanisms, and carving a tangible pathway to total transformation. Yeah. If you are listening to this, you are stepping into a space of brutal, unfiltered honesty.
Which is really the only environment where actual healing can occur. We have to strip away the romanticized language we use around dysfunctional relationships.
Absolutely. Because when we look at the clinical reality, we aren't just dealing with, a lack of communication or conflicting love languages. We are dealing with deeply ingrained biological imperatives, nervous system adaptations, and survival mechanisms that literally rewire how a person's brain perceives safety, danger, and attachment. It's essentially an involuntary neurological hijacking.
Wow, an involuntary hijacking. And, to map out how that happens and how to reverse it, we've brought a massive stack of source material to the table today for this deep dive. We are pulling from clinical psychology frameworks, trauma-informed therapy, behavioral analysis, and some really raw memoirs.
Yeah, some incredible foundational texts.
Definitely. Our roadmap includes Jax McKenzie's groundbreaking books, Whole Again and Psychopath Free. We've got Michelle and Kelly Skeen's psychological breakdown in Why Can't I Let You Go? Yeah. Holly Terry's Power Boundaries, Stephanie Sarkis's Healing from Toxic Relationships, Dennis Clark's Breaking Soul Ties. Plus, Melody Beattie's foundational work, Codependent No More, Sam Vaknin's deep dive into toxic relationships, and Nikki Nichols' really visceral memoir, Bittersweet Lessons.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. So let's unpack this. Let's start by defining the disease, because the word toxic has, it's basically lost almost all its meaning.
It really has. It's become internet slang for anyone who annoys us.
Right. So I want to push back on this right out of the gate. What is the actual clinical difference between a rough patch in a normal relationship and genuine toxicity?
It's a crucial distinction because conflating the two is what keeps people trapped. I mean, look, every relationship involves conflict. Two perfectly healthy people will argue. They will trigger each other's insecurities. They will have, periods of disconnection.
Sure, that's just life.
Exactly. But in a healthy dynamic, the underlying architecture is geared toward resolution and mutual understanding. Toxicity is structurally different. Toxicity is not just fighting. It is the systematic, methodical erosion of your reality and your sense of self.
Methodical erosion.
Right. It operates on a predictable, cyclical loop. Stephanie Sarkis breaks this down to 3 distinct phases: idealize, devalue, and discard. And Sam Vaknin's work echoes this too by highlighting how this cycle creates a shared fantasy that traps the victim.
Okay, the idealize, devalue, discard cycle. People throw those terms around on social media a lot, but I want to look at the actual mechanism of how it works, starting with the idealization phase. In Mickey Nichols' memoir, she describes the beginning of her relationship not just as a honeymoon phase, but as something almost suffocatingly intense. So is the idealized phase always this euphoric high, or can it feel overwhelming?
It can absolutely feel overwhelming. And honestly, that's often the first ignored red flag. Drawing from Jackson Mackenzie's work, we see that idealization is essentially a grooming process.
A grooming process, wow.
Yeah. The toxic individual, whether they have narcissistic traits, sociopathic tendencies, or are just deeply emotionally manipulative, they engage in intense personality mirroring. They aren't actually falling in love with you. They're gathering data.
That is terrifying.
It is. They study your hopes, your childhood wounds, your specific insecurities, your deepest desires, and then they morph their own persona to reflect those exact things back to you. Mackenzie calls this the creation of the manufactured soulmate.
Let's walk through what that actually looks like in practice, because I don't think people realize they are being mirrored until it's way too late. It's not just someone saying, oh, hey, I like that band too.
No, it's far more insidious than that.
Yeah.
Imagine you mention on a second date that you've always felt a bit like an outsider in your family because you were the only one who loved art. And you tell them you've always dreamed of opening a gallery but felt too insecure to try.
Right, a vulnerable moment.
Exactly. Now, a healthy person says, oh, that's a beautiful dream. You should really pursue it. But a toxic person using mirroring says, wow, it's like you're reading my mind. I've spent my whole life feeling like an alien among my relatives. Art is the only thing that makes sense to me. I look at you and I see the gallery owner you are meant to be. We are exactly the same.
Oh, wow. So they manufacture a sense of destiny?
Yes. They hijack your unmet needs and present themselves as the ultimate savior.
And because we all desperately want to be seen and understood, our brain just floods with dopamine. We think, finally, someone gets me.
Right.
But it's a trap, because once the anchor is set, the devaluation phase begins. And from what I understand, this isn't a sudden flip where they just turn cruel overnight. It's a slow bleed, right?
It has to be a slow bleed.
Yeah.
If it happened overnight, the victim would just leave. Devaluation begins with microaggressions. It's indirect persuasion, kind of testing the waters.
Like what?
Well, the person who said you were a brilliant artist 2 months ago suddenly makes a joke in front of your friends about how your art is, a cute little hobby.
Ouch.
Yeah. And when you get upset, they tell you that you're too sensitive or that you're overreacting. This is the introduction of gaslighting. They begin to systematically dismantle the exact identity they just help build up.
So they build you up just to tear you down.
Precisely. And then they introduce triangulation, bringing an ex-partner or a coworker or even a total stranger into the dynamic to make you feel jealous and insecure. You go from being the center of their universe to literally competing for their basic respect.
I want to look at Michelle and Kelly Skeen's framework here because they differentiate between intensity and intimacy, which I think is really the key to why we mistake this abuse for passion. Let's look at the mechanics of it.
It's a great framework.
Yeah, so think of it this way. Intensity is like a sugar rush. You drink an energy drink, it hits your bloodstream instantly, your heart rate spikes, you feel invincible. But an hour later, your blood sugar crashes, you feel nauseous, your hands are shaking, and your body is screaming for another hit just to feel normal.
That's spot on.
But true intimacy, on the other hand, is like a slow-cooked, nutrient-dense meal. It takes time. You have to prep the ingredients. It doesn't give you a manic high, but it sustains your body for the entire day.
That analogy perfectly isolates the biological difference.
Yeah.
Toxic relationships survive exclusively on that sugar rush of intensity. The toxic partner creates an environment of secrecy, mistrust, breakups, makeups. Your adrenaline is constantly pumping because you are in a state of perpetual hypervigilance.
You are always just trying to get back to the idealization phase.
Exactly. True intimacy requires safety, emotional consistency, vulnerability, and the mutual respectful negotiation of needs. A toxic person fundamentally cannot tolerate true intimacy because it requires a stable, authentic self, which they lack. They substitute chaos for connection.
So if we strip away the romantic labels, what are we actually looking at? If this isn't some tragic, star-crossed love story, What is the clinical definition of this dynamic?
It is a trauma bond. A trauma bond is a parasitic psychological dynamic. It forms when manipulation, power imbalance, and emotional abuse are paired with severe emotional inconsistency.
A parasitic dynamic.
Yes. In a trauma bond, the victim becomes entirely dependent on the abuser, not just for love, but for their baseline sense of reality. The abuser becomes the source of the pain, but because of that intermittent reinforcement, they also become the only perceived source of relief from that pain.
If we accept the biological reality of this addiction, then it forces an incredibly uncomfortable question. The people on the outside looking in, the friends, the family, they always say the same thing. They treat you terribly, why don't you just leave?
Right. The most common question.
And I want to spend a significant amount of time here, because the shame of staying is what isolates people the most. Why do smart, successful, highly capable individuals stay in relationships that are visibly destroying them?
Because logic has absolutely no jurisdiction in the limbic system. When friends say, just leave, they are appealing to the prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning part of the brain. But the trauma-bonded victim isn't operating from the prefrontal cortex.
Where are they operating from?
They're operating from the amygdala and the limbic system, the core survival centers of the brain. Stephanie Sarkis and Melody Beattie both heavily emphasize that trauma bonding is essentially indistinguishable from a severe substance use disorder. It relies on intermittent reinforcement.
This goes back to the slot machine analogy I mentioned earlier. Let's break down exactly what is happening chemically when someone pulls that lever.
Well, intermittent reinforcement is the most addictive psychological mechanism in existence.
Right.
If a slot machine paid out $1 every single time you pulled the lever, you'd get bored and walk away.
Right.
And if never paid out, you'd walk away. But because it pays out unpredictably, maybe on the third pull, maybe on the 50th, your brain becomes obsessed with the anticipation. In a toxic relationship, the abuser gives you periods of coldness, cruelty, or silence. Your cortisol, the stress hormone, spikes to unbearable levels. You are in agonizing emotional pain. Then, unpredictably, the abuser sends a sweet text, or apologizes, or brings you flowers.
And the brain reacts to that apology like it just hit the jackpot.
Exactly. The brain releases a massive flood of dopamine to counteract the cortisol. That extreme swing from terror to relief bonds you to the person on a cellular level. Dennis Clark discusses this extensively in his work. The emotional center of the brain literally wires itself to the chaos. The brain starts to equate the abuser's sudden shift back to kindness as literal survival. Leaving feels like walking away from oxygen.
I want to ground this biochemistry in a real visceral example, because talking about dopamine and cortisol can feel a bit, sterile until you see how it physically traps a human being.
It really can.
So in Dennis Clark's book, there is a detailed account of his son, Jason, and a woman named Lana. I want to unpack this story because it perfectly illustrates the paralysis of the trauma bond. Lana was not just emotionally manipulative, she was violently physically abusive.
The physical escalation in that case was horrifying.
It was. During one argument, she stabbed Jason in the face with her car keys. Another time, she smashed a heavy can of tomatoes over his head. When he tried to physically retreat from her and lock himself in a bathroom to de-escalate the situation, she kicked a hole straight through the door with her bare foot.
And yet he stayed.
And yet Jason stayed. Even more terrifying, when Jason finally hit a breaking point and threatened to walk out, Lana preemptively called the police and filed false assault charges against him.
It is the ultimate manifestation of entrapment. She utilized physical violence to create the cortisol spike and then weaponized the legal system to eliminate his exit routes. But to understand why Jason stayed before the police were involved, we have to look at his internal identity structures.
Right, because people hear that and think, I would have walked out the first time.
Exactly. But Jason operated from a profound rescuer identity, which is a core pillar of codependency, as outlined by Melody Beattie. Despite her horrific violence, Lana structurally arranged her life so that Jason felt he was the only thing keeping her alive.
She made him responsible for her survival.
Yes. She quit her job. She moved into his apartment. She developed a series of mysterious, constantly shifting medical ailments that required expensive prescriptions, which of course she relied on Jason to pay for.
So for Jason, leaving didn't feel like an act of self-preservation. In his mind, leaving felt like kicking a wounded, dying bird out into the snow. His empathy was weaponized against him.
Precisely. His entire sense of self-worth was entangled in his ability to endure her pain and save her. And the physical and emotional toll of living in that war zone was so immense that Jason himself ended up addicted to heavy anti-anxiety and antidepressant medications just to numb the daily terror.
And the devastating part. Lana encouraged his medication use. Because a medicated, sedated Jason was an easily controlled Jason, he was too exhausted to fight back.
This is a very common tactic.
That level of exhaustion brings up two psychological concepts that Sarkis writes about, which act as the final nails in the coffin. Sunk cost theory and cognitive dissonance. We've heard these terms, but I want to look at the mechanical friction they create in the mind. How does cognitive dissonance physically drain a person's ability to leave?
Cognitive dissonance occurs when the brain is forced to hold two completely contradictory truths at the exact same time. Truth A, this person is my soulmate, they understand me, they love me, we are meant to be together. Truth B, this person just smashed a can of tomatoes on my head and told me I am worthless.
They can't both be true.
No, and the human brain cannot tolerate that level of contradiction. It creates a state of psychological friction that is literally exhausting. To resolve the dissonance, the victim's brain has to rewrite reality.
It has to make excuses.
Right. It tells itself, she only hit me because she's stressed about her health. Or, he only called me those names because I provoked him. The mental gymnastics required to maintain the illusion of love drains every ounce of cognitive energy. You quite literally do not have the executive function left to pack a bag, look at an apartment listing, or make an exit plan.
And the sunk cost fallacy just anchors that exhaustion. You look back at the 3 or 5 or 10 years you've spent trying to fix this person, the thousands of dollars you've spent, the friendships you've alienated to protect the relationship, and your brain says, if I walk away now, my entire life for the last decade has been a worthless joke.
Right.
So you double down. You stay to try and force a return on the investment.
Yes. The thought of starting over at zero is more terrifying than staying in the familiar abuse.
But this brings us to what is undoubtedly the most confrontational part of our deep dive. I call this the radical honesty transition. If the biology of intermittent reinforcement is the hook that keeps you bleeding on the line, we have to ask, what was the bait? Why do certain people take the bite while others see the red flags and immediately walk away? Are we saying that victims invite the abuse? I want to push back hard here to ensure we aren't slipping into victim blaming.
Well, absolutely. We must be incredibly precise with our language here. Acknowledging your subconscious patterns is the exact opposite of victim blaming. No one ever asks to be abused, gaslit, or assaulted. The actions of the abuser are 100% their fault.
Period.
Period. However, the selection process, why you felt a magnetic pull to this specific type of chaotic person, is rooted in your own internal conditioning. In Why Can't I Let You Go? Michelle Skeen explains the psychological mechanism of repetition compulsion.
Repetition compulsion.
Yes. We do not attract what is healthy, we attract what is familiar. If your childhood environment was chaotic, if love was conditional, if your parents were emotionally unavailable, a stable, secure, healthy partner will actually feel boring or even dangerous to your nervous system.
Because your nervous system doesn't know how to navigate peace. It's waiting for the bomb to go off.
Exactly. Skeen identifies 7 core beliefs that are forged in childhood trauma or neglect. These beliefs act as the bait for toxic individuals. When a toxic person comes along, their behavior perfectly aligns with your deepest, unhealed wounds.
Let's go through all 7 of Skeen's core beliefs, because I want you, the listener, to really interrogate your own history as we list these. They are abandonment, mistrust and abuse, emotional deprivation, defectiveness, dependence, failure, and subjugation. Let's look at the mechanism of how these actually play out in real life. Take the defectiveness core belief. What does that look like on a random Tuesday?
Well, if your core belief is defectiveness, you hold a deep subconscious conviction that you are fundamentally flawed, unlovable, or bad at your core. You spend your life trying to hide this perceived defect. So when the toxic partner enters the devaluation phase and tells you that you are selfish, crazy, or worthless, you don't fight back.
Because you agree with them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A dark part of your subconscious says they finally figured it out. They see the real me. The abuse feels validating to your internal narrative. You stay because you believe you don't deserve better.
Wow. What about emotional deprivation? Because I think this is incredibly common.
Emotional deprivation is the belief that your emotional needs for nurturing, empathy, and protection will never be met by anyone. If you hold this belief, you accept absolute crumbs and call it a feast.
Crumbs?
Yeah. When the toxic partner ignores you for 3 days and then sends a one-word text, your brain interprets that tiny drop of attention as a massive victory. You are conditioned to survive in a desert, so a single drop of water feels like a miracle.
And subjugation, that sounds like what Jason was dealing with.
Yes, subjugation is the belief that you must surrender your own needs, desires, and emotions to others in order to avoid anger, retaliation, or abandonment. You become a hyper-vigilant chameleon, constantly reading the mood of the room and shrinking yourself to keep the peace. You suppress your own anger until it turns into depression.
This locks perfectly into Melody Beattie's foundational concepts in Codependent No More. She talks about the concept of the joint wound between codependents and narcissists, or toxic personalities. I always visualize this like two gears in a machine.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, so they are both broken gears. The narcissist's gear is missing teeth. They have this massive void of emptiness, a lack of self-worth that requires constant external validation. The codependent's gear has warped teeth, an obsessive need to fix, manage, and pour energy into others to prove their own worth. Two healthy, perfectly round gears would just bounce off them. But these two broken gears, they grind together destructively, but they do lock in.
That is a phenomenal mechanical breakdown of the dynamic. Beattie refers to this as a dark, unconscious pact. The toxic person needs an endless supply of tolerance, and the codependent needs an endless supply of disasters to manage.
It's a perfect match in the worst way possible.
It is. Beattie also highlights how we build entire identity polarities around this. The codependent builds a rigid sense of self around being the strong, responsible one to a weak, chaotic partner, or the good, forgiving one to a bad, deceitful partner.
But here is the terrifying realization. If your entire identity, your whole sense of purpose in the world is built on being the savior, well, you literally require a victim or a disaster to exist. If the toxic person suddenly became healthy, independent, and secure, the codependent would feel utterly purposeless.
Which is exactly why the codependent subconsciously seeks out people who are fundamentally broken. Peace threatens their identity. They need the war zone to prove they are a hero.
This leads us to a massive paradigm shift. I want to say this directly to you, the listener. If you are recognizing yourself in these broken gears, in these core beliefs, you need to understand something. The way you were treated was not your fault. The childhood that installed these beliefs was not your fault.
Not at all.
But, and this is where everything changes, you are completely 100% responsible for breaking the pattern today. No one is coming to save you. You have to dismantle the machine yourself.
And that transition from realizing why it happened to actually taking action requires us to become masters of pattern recognition. We have to see the code of the matrix before we can unplug from it. Holly Terry, Empower Boundaries, provides an excellent diagnostic tool for this. She categorizes our behavioral loops into macro patterns and micro patterns.
Let's dissect the difference, because diagnosing the problem requires looking at different magnifications. What is a macro pattern?
A macro pattern is the aerial view of your entire life trajectory. It's the recurring theme across a decade of decisions. It's sitting down and realizing, wow, the last 3 people I dated were all charming initially, but eventually revealed themselves to be financially dependent and emotionally explosive.
Or in friendships too, right?
Exactly. Like every friend group I join, I eventually become the therapist for everyone, burning myself out while no one asks how I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's the repetition of the type of person you allow into your inner circle. Michelle Skeen identifies specific archetypes that we repeatedly draw in. The abandoner, the abuser, the controller, the critic, the depriver, the devastator.
And those archetypes slot directly into the 7 core beliefs we discussed earlier. If you have the defectiveness belief, your macro pattern will be a long line of critics. You will date critics, you will work for critics, you will befriend critics. Okay, so that's the aerial view. What is a micro pattern?
A micropattern is a predictable, microscopic behavioral loop that happens within a single interaction. Terry calls this the enemy loop. It is the choreography of your specific toxicity. It's the argument you have every single Thursday.
Walk us through one of those loops.
Sure. Let's say the trigger is you asking your partner to help with chores. The micropattern goes like this. You ask politely. They perceive it as an attack and deflect blame onto something you did last week. You defend yourself and start crying. They tell you you're being hysterical and threaten to leave the house. You panic about abandonment, apologize for asking, and end up doing the chores yourself while they watch TV. You run that exact script hundreds of times.
It's like a terrible play where you both know your lines by heart. To help the listener spot their own scripts, let's run through a pattern awareness checklist. I want you to ask yourself these questions honestly. Do you constantly feel a low-level anxiety that you have to earn your partner's baseline respect through acts of service?
That's a huge one.
Right. Or do you frequently rehearse conversations in your head, trying to find the perfect combination of words that won't trigger an explosive reaction? Is there a recurring theme of self-abandonment where you bite your tongue, cancel your own plans, or literally physically shrink your posture just to regulate someone else's mood?
If the answer is yes to any of those, you are actively participating in the maintenance of the trauma bond. And that realization requires us to cross the most difficult threshold of this entire process. We have to adopt a stance of radical responsibility. Holly Terry talks extensively about the necessary shift from blame to responsibility. We have to take off our victim goggles.
I hear that, but how do we reconcile that with the very real trauma they inflicted? It feels unjust to stop blaming someone who maliciously harmed you.
It does feel unjust, which is why the ego fights it so hard. Blame is seductive. Blame feels like action. When you are furiously analyzing your abuser, diagnosing them, recounting to your friends every terrible thing they did, it feels like you are doing something about the problem.
But you aren't.
No, you aren't. Because blame keeps you anchored to the past. It keeps you oriented outward. Responsibility is oriented forward. Radical responsibility requires you to adopt a strict internal boundary. You are 100% responsible for your feelings, your reactions, and your healing, and you are 0% responsible for the feelings, reactions, or pathology of the person who hurt you.
100% responsible for me, 0% responsible for you. But to enact that, we have to dismantle the armor we've been wearing. Jackson Mackenzie's Whole again explores how our trauma forces us to build what he calls the protective self. Because the raw pain of our core wound is too terrifying to face, our psyche creates a bodyguard. And these bodyguards manifest in very specific, rigid personalities.
They do, and we rarely realize we are operating from a protective self until it's pointed out to us. Let's walk through them. One manifestation is the perfectionist. The perfectionist believes that if they can just arrange their life flawlessly, if they never make a mistake, look perfect, say the perfect thing, they will never be criticized or abandoned.
Exhausting. And what about the avoidant?
Let's look at a Tuesday night scenario with the avoidant. Your partner comes home angry, pacing the kitchen, sighing heavily. The avoidant doesn't ask what's wrong. Their nervous system detects a threat, so they physically shrink, put on noise-canceling headphones, and emotionally detach. They tell themselves they are keeping the peace or being zen, but in reality, they are completely abandoning the emotional space because it feels too dangerous.
Mackenzie also talks about a very specific modern protective self, the cluster B survivor. I see this everywhere online. This is the person whose entire identity becomes wrapped around being a victim of a narcissist. They spend 6 hours a day on forums. They read every clinical paper on sociopathy. They use clinical jargon like narcissistic supply and hoovering in casual conversation.
It's rampant.
Right. They think they are healing because they are researching, but really they are just obsessing over the abuser from a different angle.
It's a brilliant trap, the mindsets. The cluster B survivor is still entirely focused on the toxic person. They are playing detective instead of playing patient. Mackenzie drops a massive reality check regarding this. He states bluntly, "It's not about you."
That is a harsh pill to swallow. What does he mean by that?
He means that the abuser's infidelity, their gaslighting, their cruelty, it was never a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of their profound, bottomless internal emptiness. When you spend months asking, why did they do this to me? Why wasn't my love enough to fix them? You're asking the wrong questions.
So what's the right perspective?
Their behavior is an automatic function of their pathology. Trying to figure out why a toxic person betrayed you is like trying to figure out why a tornado destroyed your house. The tornado didn't hate you, it's just a tornado. It destroys whatever's in its path.
Okay, so the focus has to shift completely inward. We stop asking, why did they do this? And we start asking, what is the fact that I tolerated this trying to teach me about my own unhealed wounds?
Exactly. The focus shifts to, why did I ignore the red flags on day 2? Why did I believe I deserved to be spoken to that way? What part of me is so starved for affection that I accepted abuse as a substitute?
But I want to validate how incredibly agonizing that shift is, because making the decision to leave and look inward isn't just a cognitive choice. It is a grueling physiological ordeal. Let's talk about why leaving feels like dying. Stephanie Sarkis breaks down the chemical withdrawal symptoms of cutting contact, and it is vital that people understand this is a biological detox.
It is a severe detox. When you have been trapped in the intermittent reinforcement cycle, Your nervous system has been bathed in abnormal levels of adrenaline, cortisol, and dopamine for months or years. Your body has established this chaos as its baseline.
It's your new normal.
Yes. And when you finally leave and you go no contact, that chemical supply is abruptly cut off. Your body goes into systemic shock. Sarkis outlines the symptoms. You will experience severe, intractable insomnia. You will have brain fog so thick you might struggle to form coherent sentences or remember where you parked your car.
And physically.
Your limbs will feel physically heavy, like you are walking through wet cement. You may experience involuntary physical tremors, sudden panic attacks, and obsessive, intrusive thoughts about the abuser.
Your body is screaming for the drug. It's craving the makeup text because it needs the dopamine hit to stop the pain of the cortisol withdrawal. And Dennis Clark takes this beyond just chemistry. He describes the attachment as a soul tie. He frames it as a nearly demonic, magnetic pull that tries desperately to snap back together once it's severed. It's the reason it takes the average person 7 to 9 attempts to finally leave an abusive partner for good.
Which is exactly why we have to radically normalize the pain of leaving. This is perhaps the most important concept for anyone currently trying to escape. The crushing pain, the unbearable emptiness, the sheer terror you feel the week after you walk out the door, that pain is not a sign that you made a mistake.
Let me repeat that for the listener. The pain is not proof of love.
No. It is not evidence that they were your true soulmate and you threw it away. The pain is the poison leaving your body. If a heroin addict is sweating and shaking on the floor of a rehab clinic on day 3, no one looks at them and says, "Wow, you must really miss your soulmate. You should probably go back to the heroin."
Right.
We understand that the agony is the biological cost of getting clean. You have to endure the withdrawal to get your life back. You have to hold the line.
Hold the line. Okay, so how do we practically do that? How do we rebuild a human being who has been leveled to the foundation? Let's map out a rigorous, actionable 3-phase pathway to healing. Phase 1 is stabilization.
Stabilization is essentially triage. By stopping the emotional bleeding. According to Sarkis, the absolute non-negotiable law of phase 1 is no contact. And in the modern era, no contact is incredibly difficult.
That's not just blocking a phone number.
Not at all. It means blocking their emails. It means blocking their Venmo so they can't send you $1 with a message attached. It means blocking their friends and family so they can't triangulate. You have to remove every physical and digital trigger from your environment.
And if you are physically entangled with them, living together, sharing assets, or in a violent situation like Jason was with Lana phase 1 requires a literal escape plan. In Nikki Mikkel's memoir, she emphasizes treating your exit like a tactical extraction. You cannot wing it.
No, because it's the most dangerous time.
Exactly. Remember, Jason. When Lana escalated to trying to crash the car while he was driving, he realized logic was useless. He couldn't just have a breakup conversation on the couch. He had to coordinate a police escort to stand in the hallway just so he could safely pack his computer and clothes without Lana fabricating a domestic violence charge. You have to quietly secure your important documents, set up a separate bank account, and leave when they are not physically present.
Because if you try to leave while they are present, they will deploy every mechanism of the trauma bond rage, tears, threats of self-harm, sudden promises of therapy to flood your nervous system and prevent the exit.
So once you have successfully executed the escape and are stabilized in no contact, you can enter phase 2, emotional processing. This is the descent into the grief work.
And Sarkis points out something so profound about this specific type of grief. When someone dies, you mourn the person. But when you leave a toxic relationship, who are you actually mourning?
You are mourning a ghost.
Exactly. You are mourning the abuser. You are mourning the manufactured soulmate that never actually existed outside of the idealization phase. You are grieving the illusion. You are grieving the years of your life that you poured into a black hole. And perhaps most painfully, you are mourning the unconditional love and safety that you so desperately wanted but never received. You have to let yourself feel the profound anger and devastation of that betrayal.
Nikki Nicole uses an analogy for this phase that I think perfectly visualizes the objective. She compares emotional trauma to a deep, jagged cut on your arm. When the cut is fresh and unhealed, it controls your life. If the wind blows against it, you wince. If someone accidentally brushes your arm, you scream in agony and bleed. But once you do the work to clean it, stitch it, and let it heal, the dynamic changes.
The scar tissue forms.
Right. You can run your hand over it, you can press on it. The immense disabling pain is gone. It leaves a scar, a permanent visible reminder of the injury. But the wound is closed. Phase 2 is about meticulously cleaning the debris out of the cut so it can finally close.
And closing the wound naturally transitions us into phase 3, identity rebuilding. When the chaos is gone and the wound is closed, you are left with a terrifying silence. Who are you without the crisis? Jackson Mackenzie's approach to this phase focuses on confronting the core wound itself, that fundamental lie that you are defective or unlovable.
But how does a person actually shed a core wound? It sounds beautiful in theory, but what is the literal mechanism of doing that?
It requires an intentional surrender of the protective self. You have to drop the perfectionism, the obsessive researching, the people-pleasing. You have to sit alone in a room with the uncomfortable, terrifying emptiness. You feel the anxiety rising in your chest. You feel the boredom, the shame, the fear.
And you don't run from it.
No. Instead of picking up your phone or overworking or jumping into a new relationship to numb it, you just sit with it. You observe the physical sensations in your body without trying to fix them. And as you allow those deeply suppressed feelings to finally be processed and released by the nervous system, the heavy fog lifts. Your true, authentic self, the one you abandoned to survive, starts to cautiously reemerge.
That is profound, but it is a long game. I want to equip the listener with tools they can use right now in the trenches while they are doing that long-term work. Let's talk about Holly Terry's power boundaries. This concept is an absolute game changer for people who historically fold under pressure.
Terry dissects boundaries into 3 distinct escalating categories: relationship defining, relationship transforming, and relationship ending.
Break those down for us.
Relationship defining boundaries establish the baseline rules of engagement, how you expect to be spoken to, your need for autonomy. Relationship transforming boundaries are deployed when a dynamic has become toxic, and you clearly state what specific behaviors must change for the connection to continue. Relationship ending boundaries are the ultimate line in the sand. They are the absolute deal breakers where a violation results in permanent severance.
But the real magic of Terry's framework isn't just knowing the boundaries, it's how you deliver them. She calls it speaking inarguably. I love this because toxic people are master debaters. If you give them an inch, they will turn the conversation upside down.
They absolutely will.
Speaking inarguably means stating your boundary as an absolute fact about your behavior, leaving zero room for gaslighting or negotiation. You do not say, I feel like you're being really aggressive, could you please calm down? Because they will immediately argue that they aren't aggressive, and now you are debating their tone. Instead, you say, I will not participate in a conversation where voices are raised. If the yelling continues, I will leave the house for the night.
Exactly. You remove their ability to debate your feelings by focusing entirely on your own non-negotiable action. To support this boundary work, Michelle Skeen offers a tactical tool called the Triggering Person Action Plan. It is designed to stop you from falling into the enemy loop when someone provokes you.
It's a 4-step cognitive circuit breaker. Let's walk through the friction of actually doing this. Step 1, identify the triggering event. Let's say your mother makes a passive-aggressive comment about your weight at dinner. Step 2, name the core belief that just got triggered. Internally, you recognize, my defectiveness core belief is screaming right now.
Right. Naming it removes its power.
Step 3, recognize your automatic coping response. Historically, your response might be to either scream back at her, which is fighting, or completely shut down, stop eating, and hate yourself for the rest of the week, which is subjugation.
And step 4 is where the power lies. Execute a value-driven action instead of the automatic trauma response. You pause. You take a breath to regulate your nervous system. You remind yourself that you value self-respect and emotional maturity. So instead of screaming or shutting down, you calmly look at her and use an inarguable boundary. I will not discuss my body at the dinner table. If it's brought up again, I will head home. You short-circuit the entire toxic loop.
And to endure the adrenaline spike that follows setting a boundary like that, Stephanie Sarkis emphasizes somatic grounding. You have to physically calm the animal part of your brain. That means utilizing deep diaphragmatic breathing to lower cortisol. It means maintaining rigorous sleep hygiene. And crucially, it means journaling.
The journaling is non-negotiable.
Sarkis insists that you must write down the reality of toxic interactions immediately after they happen. Toxic people rely on memory distortion. If you write down exactly what was said, when they try to gaslight you 3 days later by saying, I never said that you're crazy, you have the objective truth documented.
That documentation is your anchor to reality. And as you utilize these tools and process the grief, you eventually arrive at part 9, becoming whole again. Healing is not just returning to a neutral state of not being abused. The objective is genuine wholeness.
I want to use Jackson Mackenzie's definition of wholeness because it shifts the entire paradigm. He defines wholeness as resolving the core wound to the extent that unconditional love flows freely from within you rather than needing to be extracted from someone else.
It is the ultimate liberation. Wholeness means you are no longer a fragmented, incomplete entity desperately scanning the room for missing puzzle pieces. You are emotionally self-sufficient.
Here is the most powerful realization of this entire journey. When you restore your own inner light, you no longer require the energy of others to feel alive. Think about the magnitude of that invulnerability. If you do not need someone else's validation to prove your worth, toxic people have absolutely zero leverage over you. You detach your core identity from your relationship status.
It changes everything.
You can be deeply loved, you can be cruelly rejected, you can be single, you can be partnered, and your internal baseline of worth remains completely, unshakably intact.
That is the defining difference between healthy love and codependent dependency. Codependency is two starving people clinging to each other, trying to eat each other's meager rations to survive. Healthy love, as the Skeens illustrate, is a value-driven life where two whole, complete, emotionally fed individuals choose to walk alongside each other. It embraces true intimacy, assertiveness, and deep connection without the sacrifice of individual identity.
But once you build that beautiful, unshakable fortress of wholeness, how do you defend it? Because relapse is a very real statistical threat. The trauma bond has deep roots. How do we ensure we never go back and never attract this dynamic again?
Relapse prevention requires conscious, daily vigilance. Nikki Nichols' ultimate lesson looking back on her trauma is a mandate. Never, ever ignore the red flags in hindsight. When survivors analyze a destroyed relationship, they always realize the red flags were waving on day one.
They are always there.
A snide, devaluing comment disguised as a joke. A boundary slightly pushed, just to see if you would enforce it. An intense, unearned declaration of love within a week of meeting. You saw those flags, and you consciously chose to paint them green because you wanted the fantasy to be real. To protect your wholeness, you must make a blood oath to your own intuition. If you feel that familiar, chaotic sugar rush in your gut, you don't investigate it. You walk away.
Jackson Mackenzie actually provides a formal, psychopath-free pledge for survivors. It is a daily commitment to self-respect. It is an active rejection of the compulsion to fix broken people. You formally resign from your role as the universe's unpaid therapist.
And that resignation is vital, because Sarkis issues a severe clinical warning about vicarious traumatization. This happens frequently. A survivor does the hard work, heals, and then decides they need to save everyone else.
Oh, I've seen that so many times.
Right. They join endless trauma support groups, they counsel vulnerable friends, they immerse themselves back into the world of abuse narratives. Sarkis warns that if your own core wounds are not entirely solidified, immersing yourself in other people's trauma will trigger a relapse. You will absorb their emotional agony, develop compassion fatigue, and potentially fall right back into the familiar rescuer identity.
So what's the alternative?
You have to secure your own oxygen mask. And sometimes the most profound act of healing is walking away from the trauma space entirely and just living a boring, peaceful, happy life.
Just living your life is the ultimate victory. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to guide us through one final monumental integration. Over the course of this discussion, we've deconstructed the abuse, the biology of the bond, the core beliefs, the tactical boundaries, and the pathway to wholeness. But the ultimate identity shift, and this draws heavily on Holly Terry's concept of marching proud with an open heart, is moving your internal narrative away from the question, why did this happen to me?
That question, while natural during the grieving phase, ultimately keeps you anchored in a victim mentality. It keeps your life story centered around what the abuser did.
Exactly. You must step fully and completely into a near empowering question. Who am I becoming through this? And to you, the listener, I want to say this directly. The fact that you have stayed with us through this deep dive, engaging with material that asks you to look at your darkest wounds, your deepest shame, and your most painful behavioral patterns, is a testament to your profound, undeniable strength. Toxic people run from this kind of introspection. They build entire false realities to avoid looking in the mirror. You are facing the mirror head on.
Which brings us to a final paradigm shift, something for you to mull over long after you finish listening. We spend so much time cursing our core wounds. We wish we had just had a normal, unbroken childhood, a normal relationship history, a life without the scars.
But what if?
Right, what if your core wound wasn't a life sentence? What if that deep crack in your foundation was actually the exact, precise map you needed to discover an invincible depth of character? What if surviving that agonizing emotional crucible built a level of empathy, resilience, and true, unshakable wholeness that a normal, unbroken life would never, ever have forced you to find?
The wound becomes the map. We started this deep dive talking about the myth of the bad breakup, the frustration that emotional trauma doesn't show up on an x-ray, that the damage is invisible. But maybe the goal isn't to find a clean break that can simply be put in a cast. Maybe the goal is to realize that navigating those terrifying depths, facing the absolute worst of your own patterns, and surviving the withdrawal is exactly how you become unbreakable. You aren't permanently damaged. You are waking up. You are taking responsibility, and you are becoming whole again.
Everything we explore today is only as valuable as what you do with it. Information without transformation is just noise. Over the last decade, I've built a methodology specifically designed to help you take what you are learning about your mind, your emotions, your consciousness, and yourself, and actually live it, use it. Use it practically in your daily life. It is the methodology which I called the ALINE method, which stands for awareness, letting go, intention, and mindfulness. Or when you master it, it becomes a life in miracles. And if today's episode stirred something up in you, come find out how I can put it into practice, how you can use this practical tool in your life. Visit alinemethod.com or connect with me on Instagram, Spirit of James.